Good evening. We will begin our commencement ceremony by listening to the Star-Spangled Banner as sung by Matthew Julien, a senior who earned his bachelor's degree in vocal performance at the previous ceremony.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last streaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Please be seated. At Missouri State University, we're very proud of our many outstanding programs. One such program is our music department, where many talented and dedicated students study and train. It is our pleasure to have the Missouri State University Jazz Ensemble 1, conducted by Dr. Jason Hosbach, with us today. I invite you to enjoy the sounds of the Jazz Ensemble as they entertain us with Sing a Simple Song by Bob Mintzer. You're going to enjoy this. Welcome to commencement. Missouri State observes 2 commencement periods during the year. The spring commencement is held in mid-May, and the fall commencement occurs at the end of December. This is one of 3 such programs today. Because of the large number of graduates, we are conferring graduate and bachelor's degrees in the Dar College of Agriculture, the College of Business, and the interdisciplinary academic program majors at this ceremony. We conferred bachelor and graduate degrees to the students in the other colleges at the earlier ceremonies today. Over the course of today, we will award 3,078 degrees. Yeah. Of that total, 2,222 are undergraduate and 856 are graduate. The Missouri State University faculty and staff are proud to recognize members of this graduating class who have distinguished themselves by their academic achievement and leadership and who have earned academic or performance scholarships. Funding for many of these scholarships is made possible by alumni and friends of the university, and we thank them for their support and generosity. Several governors of the university are on the platform today. Members of the board are appointed by the governor of the state of Missouri and approved by the state senate. They serve 6-year terms and carry the responsibilities set forth in statute as the policy-making board for the institution. We also have a student representative on the board of governors who serves a 2-year term. We're grateful to the governors for the time they take from their schedules and give to the university, and are pleased that several can be with us today to take part in commencement. I will now introduce the platform party. They will stand as their names are called. I would ask that you hold your applause until all have been introduced. Beginning in the second row, my right, your left, Neosha Mackey, Emeritus Dean of Library Services, who will be reading names of graduates. Bradley Cooper, a student from Willard, and our student member of the Board of Governors. Laura Derrick, Chair of the Staff Senate. Dr. Elizabeth Walker, past Chair of the University Faculty Senate. Dr. Melissa Gorley, a veterinarian from Mountain Grove and member of the Board of Governors. Chris Waters, a businessman from Kansas City and member of the Board of Governors. And Dr. Tanya Tinsley, Associate Professor of World Languages and Cultures, who will also be reading names of the graduates. In the front row, beginning at my right, your left, Dr. Anson Elliott, Emeritus Dean of the Dar College of Agriculture and member of the Board of Governors. Jeff Schrag, a businessman from Springfield and member of the Board of Governors. Tim Franska, a businessman from Bolivar and member of the Board of Governors. Lynn Parman, a businesswoman from Parkville and chair of the Board of Governors. David Trottier, former owner of Smitty's Supermarkets and our honorary bachelor's degree recipient at this ceremony. Dr. John Jasinski, University Provost, and Brent Dunn, Vice President for University Advancement. Please help me recognize the platform party. Good. The faculty and administrators have led in the educational process for our graduates. Many of these people are present today and are seated to my right and left. I request that they now stand and you recognize them with your applause for their contributions. Thanks. It is now my great pleasure to introduce the recipient of the university's honorary baccalaureate degree. The university recognizes the achievement of certain outstanding individuals by awarding them honorary degrees. To be nominated, a person cannot be a member of the Missouri State University Faculty, Staff, Administration, or Board of Governors, nor can they be a serving elected official. Although individuals with nationwide and worldwide recognition are not excluded, preference is given to distinguished candidates who have not already been widely recognized and honored. A faculty committee selects the honorees, which in turn are approved by the Faculty Senate, the Board of Governors, and me. Today, we recognize and honor David Trottier, former president of Smitty's Supermarkets. David is a strong supporter of local education and has decades-long record of generous support for a variety of local institutions working to improve the quality of life in Springfield and the surrounding region. Due to the demands of his work and accomplishments, David was unable to complete a college degree. Today, Missouri State University is proud to honor him and recognize his many outstanding achievements. David, if you would stand for the conferring of your degree. By the authority of the state of Missouri, vested in the Board of Governors and delegated to me, I now confer upon you the honorary baccalaureate degree and commend you for your service and dedication to our community and this university. Please watch this video we made with Dave detailing his career and leadership.
Hey, I'm Dave Trottier. I'm Springfield, Missouri. Been here for 42 years. I'm getting an honorary bachelor's degree. It's the most exciting thing that's ever happened to me at Missouri State. It's very exciting for me, the opportunity to graduate with a class like that. When you're 81 years old and you look at all these kids out there that are 20 years old, I've been around long enough to know that education is the most important thing you'll ever have. The summer of '77, when I came here on my birthday, there was a store, 65,000 square foot store on Glenstone that had gone bankrupt. It was an opportunity for me to step out into running my own business. And then in '83, we built the first Big Smitty store. It was the biggest grand opening Springfield had ever seen. We just grew from there. Everything, we had people that were motivated, people that wanted to come work for Smitty's for the opportunity to be successful. We paid our people well. We went from a $11 million store to a $170 million in sales. We sold Smitty's to Albertsons. I wasn't ready to retire. I was 55 years old. Like I used to say, you have a PhD in grocery business. I said, yeah, I've got a master's in that. Yeah, I told my wife, I think we need to continue in the grocery business. So we designed a store of 38,000 square feet. I said, I'm not sure what we want to call it unless it's, why don't we call it Summer Fresh? Summer's my daughter. My son, Brent, eventually took it over and sold it to Price Cutter. I knew that the grocery business was going to be my life, and I couldn't take that time to go to college. I don't think I could have exceeded anything better than what I did here. I watched my kids grow up and go to college, and so well educated, and especially going to Missouri State. Even my wife is better educated than I ever was. To me, it's home. Since 1977, I've never missed a home game. I've been to every one of those games. And cold, snow, bad weather, I've just been a diehard Missouri State fan. This is an honor that I just can't imagine what happened. I almost broke down and started crying when I found that out. And when something you never expected to happen happens, it's a thrill. It's a thrill of a lifetime. It's something very touching to me because it's something I never expected. Proud that the institution accepted Dave Trottier and Smitty's. Now, it didn't come by accident. We did support Missouri State, but Missouri State supported us. Knowing that we have put ourselves in a place to be part of this university, and knowing that plaque is out there, represents the Trottiers, but represents Missouri State. I've been a huge supporter for the Bears for all these years, but today, I'm a Bear. A Bear forever. Go Bears.
Ready? The Army Reserve Officers Training Corps has been a cooperative partner in the university's educational program since 1952. Tomorrow, 8 students will be commissioned as second lieutenants into the United States Army at a ceremony held at Plaster Student Union. We wish them well in their future military careers. The veterans and military members living, working, and receiving their education at the university are a valued and vital component of our campus community. We recognize and honor their sacrifices and the sacrifices of their families and value their life experiences as they broaden the diversity of our faculty, staff, and student body. As such, students graduating from Missouri State University who have served, or will be serving after graduation in the United States Armed Forces have been invited to wear a red, white, and blue honor cord at today's ceremony in recognition of their service to our country. I now invite these individuals to stand and be recognized. Good. Good. All right, you may be seated. Missouri State University has long-standing academic relationships and partnerships with many educational institutions in China. Liaoning Normal University and Missouri State created the LNU-MSU College of International Business 24 years ago, which is located in Dalian. After earning an AA degree in Dalian, students are eligible to transfer to Springfield's campus, where a majority work toward their bachelor's degree in the College of Business. Many of those students continue at the university in pursuit of a master's degree. I would like to offer our international students who have traveled so far from home my congratulations on their academic achievements. At this time, graduates for all degrees will be presented by Dr. John Jasinski, University Provost. It is understood, of course, that no candidate graduates officially until all grades are recorded and a final examination of the student's record is made.
Will the candidates for all master's degrees please rise? A round of applause. President Smart, these candidates completed all of the requirements for their respective master's degree. The graduate faculty of Missouri State University are pleased to present them to you for the conferring of the degree.
By the authority of the state of Missouri vested in the Board of Governors and delegated to me, I now confer upon you the master's degree. I testify that you have surmounted the first level of graduate studies and wish you every success as you serve humanity through your accomplishments.
Will all the candidates except those in the first row please be seated? And will the candidates for master's degrees in the first row please proceed forward, followed by master's candidates in other rows, as directed by our marshals.
Dr. Julie Masterson, who is Associate Provost and Dean of the Graduate College, and Dr. Carissa Holscher, Associate Dean of the Graduate College, will hood the candidates. Dr. Tonya Tinsley and Neosha Mackey will present the students.
Nabila Binte Abed.
Ethan Allard Freitas.
Braden
Chance Lane Bailey.
Braden J. Prosser.
Connor John Langan.
Jada Kiran Dagani.
Samantha Nicole George.
Vincent T. Vanderveer II.
Timothy Andrew Bone.
Roger Perry.
Gabriel Brian Fox.
Misty L. Webster.
Michael Talbot.
Dennis Judd.
Scott Emery Friesen.
Matthew Paul Yonke.
James Jackson Hutchison.
Andrew Wendell James Duckworth.
Michael John Mudry.
Eric Christopher Palashek,
Jaden Michael Duval,
Nicole K. Plenge,
Sean A. Sample,
Francesca Guzman,
Sydney Martin,
Emily Ann Tinnen,
Ian Hadley Brown,
Yuri Christy Lee,
Mark N. Rajabi,
Lindsay Christine Murphy,
Chelsea A. Johnson,
Warren Thorne Sangwon Rajasap,
Cassidy Taylor Fox,
Anthony Cesar Pace,
Blake Austin Metcalf,
Angelo Vasquez,
Landon John Zartman, Spencer L. Nylon III,
Ayuk Inyang Ayuk,
Tracy R. Nash,
Brett David Houston,
Johanna Wallenhaupt,
Jake Charles Schlereth,
Zuljala Ali Akram,
Seokhoon Lee,
Wang Hao,
Emily Grace Moore,
Shu Jiaxing,
Manami Akiyama,
Jennifer Renee Culver,
Ku Si Shin,
Wang Zihan,
Huilin Wong,
Liang Hongray,
Yasin Chao,
Chin Andy,
Meng Shen,
Liu Shi Yuan,
Chuyan Shen,
Zhao Jing,
Hong Chuo Lu,
Kong Yong Hua,
Yi Jia,
Wang Xinwei, Rebecca Michelle Rican,
Alex Stevens Off,
Mason Griffin Wheeler,
Philip Joseph Carr,
Abigail C. Rich,
Olivia Grace Bokern,
Gabrielle Reese Prinster,
Catherine Riley Luthauser,
Hannah Marie Schmid,
Madison Noel Shaniel,
Lucy Lee Pettit,
Pedro Paulo Nicolini da Costa Coelho,
Bailey Ann Ewert,
Jack Brosnan Clement,
Gracie Ann Hodgson,
Alec Jordan Mueller,
Wang Jin Yue,
Nina Richelle Aguilar,
Ashley Marie Ayala,
Jameson Riley Garmer,
Brett C. Harpt,
Caroline Marie DeBryan,
Kylie Ree Gillen,
Rhiannon Elizabeth Morrow Williams,
Brett Christopher Sorrell,
Ryan Christopher Gorsica,
Matthew Christopher Morgan,
Ananya Gudepu,
Dunjai Klipwa,
Arun Babu Guduri,
Diana Cabrera,
Priyanka Malapa Devi,
Sarah Elizabeth Smith,
Sai Supriya Vallabhdasu,
Susie Minahan,
Niharika Dasari,
Jenna Renee Johnson, Ashley Nicole Philpott,
Rohila Mustala,
Sean A. Street,
Pudvi Raj Goli,
Eric M. Zander,
Monduk Nguyen,
Justin David Doherty,
Na Ha Nguyen,
Timilolua Esther Adeyemi,
Oluwadari Emmanuel Ogunyinka,
Annie Kathleen Hall,
Cherubim Julian Ividiora,
Sarah Marie Terry,
Emmanuel Arhin,
Reese Lou Dickey,
Bachimeg Sogma,
Ellen Baxter,
Sunday James Anwama,
Ainsley Lynn Krug,
Olajimoki Janet Aladipupo,
Tabenda Shahid, Abdul Rahman Zawabi,
Kenneth Otu Anwada,
Sai Meghana Gudavada,
Olalekan Victor Ajayi Kafi,
Sandeep Kumar Mora,
Elizabeth A. Bridgers,
Ayesha Sadiqua,
Kian Yari,
Muhammad Mansour Ahmed,
Vincent I. Gardner,
okay, Anwar Khan,
Timothy V. Corley,
Joshua Lester Seiler,
Caitlin R. Jedlicka,
Brooke Ann Frost,
Maddie Coben,
Brady Scott Brashers,
Sarah Elizabeth McCord,
Ali Michelle Spica,
Ilianta Dianta Christine Curie,
Riley Hope Lawrence,
Ethan Douglas Dahl,
Emily Nicole Fritz,
Brian Noe Saravia Mejia,
Kate Riley Herberholt.
Zachary Keith Clifton Doherty.
Corinne Danielle Siebert.
Megan E. Horton.
Cole Robert Meyer.
Stephanie Ortiz.
Braden Kyle Mills.
Chicago Paige Baines.
Alexandra Page Bennett.
Cameron Tyrese Craddock.
Nangan Christian Conan.
Autumn Silomua Fuimadno Iono Fuima Aono.
Nicole Teggy.
Stetson Jamal Moore.
Wade William Passy. Kara Nicole Meyer.
Hannah Mae Todabush.
Alexis Joelle Davis.
Dejanay Marche Watkins.
Daniela Rodriguez Villa.
Amanda Lynn Jones.
Hero Rueda.
Hattie Mae Taylor. Laird Donald Stephen Jackson.
Before we confer the bachelor degrees, I would like to note the scholastic accomplishments of several of these students. Would the students wearing the blue stoles please rise?
Do we have any?
Out there, Cliff?
Nope, don't have any. Let's skip that.
Then we'll
Okay.
move on with the ceremony. Okay. Several students are graduating with scholastic honors and are identified by the cordons they are wearing. Students graduating summa cum laude have achieved a grade point average of at least 3.90. Will those students graduating summa cum laude and wearing the gold cordon please rise and remain standing? Students graduating magna cum laude have achieved a grade point average between 3.75 and 3.89. Would those students graduating magna cum laude and wearing the silver cordon please rise and remain standing? Finally, students graduating cum laude have achieved a grade point average between 3.50 and 3.74. Would those students graduating cum laude and wearing a bronze cordon please rise and remain standing? On behalf of the university, we wish to congratulate these students on their impressive scholastic achievements. And now, will the candidates for all bachelor degrees please rise? All bachelor degrees candidates, please. President Smart, these candidates completed all of the requirements for their respective bachelor's degrees. The faculty of Missouri State University take great pleasure in presenting them to you for the conferring of a degree.
by the authority of the state of Missouri vested in the Board of Governors and delegated to me, I now confer upon you the bachelor degree and wish you the best in your careers.
Will all candidates except those in the first row please be seated? And will the candidates for bachelor degrees in the first row please proceed forward, followed by bachelor degree candidates in other rows as directed by our marshals.
Dr. Tanya Tinsley and Neosha Mackey will again present the students.
Guillermo Martins de Carvalho Bloomer.
Catherine Virginia DeLapp.
Stephen Wayne Pierce.
Adam J. Hirsch.
John Andrew Cooper.
Blake Patrick Teal.
Tucker Chase King.
Zachary Ray Marlowe, cum laude.
Elise McKenna Pruitt, magna cum laude.
Desiree Rose Wiles.
Alyssa L. Weiser.
Ian James Anderson.
Nathan C. Stoner.
Davin Isaiah Asbury.
Tivata Fuimaono.
Zachary Tyler Graham, cum laude.
Jack L. Griffith.
David Keith Fields.
Dax Stephen Canalican.
Gage Dalton Brumley, magna cum laude.
Nerhins Toshani, magna cum laude.
Blake William Reisner.
Jacob William Wheathop.
Eric Scott Schussler, cum laude.
Jake Edward Kopinski.
William Dehan Renardiv Ajanate.
Levi Alexander Wright.
Nicholas Chung E. Loke.
Andrew James Koutsajanis.
Chase Brady Porter.
Thomas Charles Raymer, cum laude.
Alec Christopher Gamble.
Jason Joseph Kelly.
Ethan R. Taplin.
Mark David Kapkovic, Jr.
Brock Justin Gerhart.
Caleb Patrick Allen Pierce.
Andrew Charles Meek, summa cum laude.
Maya Marie Nurstheimer, cum laude.
Henry James Friedman.
Jenna Nicole McCauley.
Cameron Michael Beck.
Ashley Elizabeth Meyer.
Jacob C. Holmstrom.
Josephine C. Hutchison.
Gavin Scott McMurray.
Olivia Rose Hess.
Connor Paul Orgill.
Caitlin F. Messina.
Brittany N. Spangenberg, summa cum laude.
Macy Aaron Williams.
Kaya Kiota Wilson, magna cum laude.
Kaylin Elaine Hinkle.
Callie Ashton Gilbreth, cum laude.
Maxwell Peter Pritz.
Shaylin Deanne Milligan.
Nicholas R. Maurer,
Megan Ting Harrison, summa cum laude.
Hayden Lee Paulson, cum laude.
Savannah Ray Birdsell, cum laude. Mia Polite.
Jeremy Michael Gendron.
Henry Nolan Mandel.
Eileen Andrea Sims, magna cum laude.
Ryan Michael Borillo.
Alessia Pulio, cum laude.
Blake A. Ludwig.
Uliana Zubina.
Hayden Bruce Hopper.
Yulia Zubina.
Nicholas Hugh Wiley.
Kelly Seago, summa cum laude.
Abigail Joe Danielson, magna cum laude.
Dino A. Patel, summa cum laude.
Molly Christine Bange.
Cheyenne Nicole Murdy.
Erica Gwen Lauer, cum laude.
Hallie A. Pfeiffer.
Brooke Aaron Walker.
Amanda Nicole Green, magna cum laude.
Matthew Thomas Muldoon.
Catherine Elizabeth Montgomery, magna cum laude.
Tobin P. Sargent, magna cum laude.
Carly Elizabeth Brownig, cum laude.
David Christopher Layton, cum laude.
Kayla Rose Fitzner, magna cum laude.
Austin M. Kuhn, cum laude.
Michael Dennis Peck, cum laude.
Kylie Ray Samples.
Lorenzo Robé, cum laude.
Abigail Elizabeth Ruther.
Nicole Micaela Gordon Gualpa, cum laude.
Megan Danielle Rissinger.
Anna Jo Gosserand.
Taylor Ann McOlgan.
Peyton Mackenzie Inlow.
Chloe Faith Casey.
Jackson Lee Riddle.
Kelly Marie Flanagan, cum laude.
Cade Christian Danielson.
Caitlin Maria Johnson, cum laude.
Chris Charles Rice.
London Angel Stuckenschneider, cum laude.
Samuel T. Martin, cum laude.
Claudia Lisette Horvath.
Clay T. Lawson.
Grace Geneva Greenwald.
Wu Chen Shin, magna cum laude.
Kristen M. Dennis, magna cum laude.
Zhe Chen Gao.
Wing H. Chuck.
Jing Yi Shun.
Lauro A. Estrada, magna cum laude.
Christina Marie Moody.
Elizabeth Grimm.
Taylor Dawn Burns.
Ryan Eugene Finney.
Heather Lee Jenkins.
Jack David Rodenberg.
Triona Leach.
Jack T. Lorero, magna cum laude.
Labiba Rahman, cum laude.
Yoon Sung Nam.
Savannah Evelyn Stevens.
Tru Dong Nguyen, cum laude.
Israel R. Smith.
Kaylee Glaspie.
Alex Fernando Gutierrez, summa cum laude.
Joe Win Bo.
Jessica Page Friedhoff.
Gabriel J. Randolph, magna cum laude.
Elizabeth Grace Friedhoff.
Brogan L. Fields.
Lydia Marie Henderson.
David R. Green, cum laude.
Nicholas John Ney.
Kyra Nicole Wales.
Kyler S. Reed.
Macy Lane Ballard, cum laude.
James Franklin Stith III, cum laude.
Addison Nicole Hillenberg.
David P. Jogan.
Carly A. Critchlow.
Mia Britt McDermott, magna cum laude.
Keaton Alexander Huff.
Angel Cervantes Pina.
Courtney Summer Flores Norris.
Hannah Elizabeth Toll, magna cum laude.
Maggie E. Easterly.
Morgan Elise Kelleher, summa cum laude.
Adam McKinley Gann.
Alexa Marie Bush, cum laude.
Josiah Robert Deegan.
Yukina Hata.
Austin T. Faust, magna cum laude. Michaelin Marie Wilson.
Colin M. Rice.
Maggie Grace Hackenworth, magna cum laude.
Racy Lynn Jolie Mathis.
Hayden M. Crockett, cum laude.
Annabella Marie Huffhines.
Makina Reese Harmon, cum laude.
Rebecca Marie Osterly, magna cum laude.
Leah Hope Platter.
Brianna Danielle Walker, summa cum laude.
Abby Win-Win Dameron, summa cum laude.
Paige N. Becker.
Delaney Elizabeth Frost.
Courtney Marie Dorr, magna cum laude.
Bailey Aaron Neese.
Harper Joy Collins, cum laude.
Grant Michael Goodson, cum laude.
Ella Ray Reed, cum laude.
William Adam Gilbert.
Faith I. Brandon.
Shyla D. Horgan.
Olivia Ann Willard, cum laude.
Grace Gundelfinger,
Emily E. McCullough,
Gage S. Rombach,
Megan Suzanne Kolochuk, cum laude.
Paxton Elliott Frankie,
Dylan Carson Walsh Henis,
Andrew David Willman,
William James Dexheimer,
Jenna Elise Capra,
Lindsay L. Carroll, summa cum laude.
Luis Manuel Olivo Jerez,
Skylar N. Whitworth, summa cum laude.
Austin J. Husky, cum laude,
Clifton R. Barrett, magna cum laude.
Robert Carr Hill,
Anika Hoagland Mackey,
Carson Robert Albers, magna cum laude,
Ryan Nichols Meesey,
Reese A. Canby,
Grady Michael Ripple,
Joshua Wade Hanson,
Tuan Chung Vo,
Hunter Lofton,
Chai Van Nguyen,
Joseph Norman Audifred,
Connor Ashley,
Adrian Jr. Monsivez,
Prentice Nigel Hall,
Zane G. Wimmer,
Caleb Blake,
Brendan Reese Shackles,
Joseph Dylan Keck, summa cum laude.
Daniel William Comer,
Evan Costello,
Christopher Joseph Yelderman,
Devin Weeprecht,
Cole Austin Perry,
Aaron Klein Switzer, cum laude.
Andrew F. Groupie,
Bradley O. Etherton,
Tristan Jeffrey Christ,
Brandon K. Hoffman,
Tim Ellsworth Gettis,
Cameron L. Haverdink, magna cum laude.
Luke Anthony Taylor,
Griffin J. O'Neill,
Joseph Howard Dale, magna cum laude,
Katrine Jensen, summa cum laude.
Bryson J. Trogdon, cum laude,
Shane M. Cantrell,
Grant Lee Tanner,
Braden David Miller,
Connor J. Koenig,
Elida Mairani Orozco Sanchez,
William J. Seibert, cum laude,
Elise Malie Noble,
Garrett Michael Monpetit,
Phoebe Howe Kurtek,
Nicholas D. Wangerin,
Colton K. Swindle, cum laude.
Jacob G. Wattles, magna cum laude,
Robert Ernie Perkins, cum laude.
Grace Emery Miller.
Jake Lloyd Childs.
Emma Catherine Earls.
Richard Ty Jenkins.
Chevy Dean Max Lundy.
Hampton Cesar Minifield.
Ian Kent Esri, cum laude.
Cody Johnson Doan.
Amber E. Granberg, magna cum laude.
Gage Lewis Harris, summa cum laude.
Andrea Beth Moore.
Jacob Christopher Schulenberg.
Grace Elizabeth Griffin.
Lucas William Schulenberg.
Bo Nicholas Gerard.
Sarah Arlene Glazer, summa cum laude.
Jennifer May Neuschwander, magna cum laude.
Jillian Nadine Menzer.
Parker William Bierman.
Brooke Lauren Ramsey.
Joseph Theodore Monks.
Morgan Courtney, cum laude.
Olivia Ray Roberts.
Kennedy J. Bateman, magna cum laude.
Benjamin Joel Wilson, cum laude.
Drew Michael Reekman.
Jake Jerome Havemeyer.
Kellen Anne Marie Nouthrop.
Braden Thomas Kunkel.
Anderson Stiles.
Jessica Lynn Furman.
Brian Crawford Hampton.
Rafe Thompson Ayers.
Gavin Scott Gregory.
Donovan L. Clay.
Lalana Nicole Walden.
Hong E. Ming, cum laude.
Alexis Marie Scroggins, cum laude.
Puti Kayo Indaswari, cum laude.
Justin James Jensen.
Faith Morosky.
Madison Mackenzie Osborne.
Wyatt G. Malott.
Alyssa L. Myers.
L. Elizabeth Jensen, cum laude.
Angelina Elizabeth Garcia, magna cum laude.
Jacelyn Ann Datus.
Melissa Leah Manley, magna cum laude.
Max Schaefer Thompson, magna cum laude.
Madison Page Arwood, summa cum laude.
Logan Modlin.
Alexis Christine Davis.
Brandon Lane.
Courtney L. Martin.
Quinn Sylvie.
Madison Grace Boren.
Luke James Uxa, magna cum laude.
Carson Dean Boren, cum laude.
Scott James Mosbacher.
Caleb Anthony East.
Grant Fisher.
Caden Thomas Minnis, cum laude.
Thomas X. Bardwell.
Sophie Grace Harrington.
Jack Raphael Baraka.
Patrick O'Brien Ladd.
Brady Christopher Atkins.
Shelby McKinney.
Charles Patrick Applebaum.
Parker Lynn Pfeiffer.
Ethan James Strauss, magna cum laude.
Brooke Ashlyn Reeder.
Ethan Adam Oliver.
Josie Lauren Riley.
Noah Christian Schwartz, cum laude.
Natalie Elizabeth Adler.
Catherine Hope Towns, cum laude.
Jacob Maynard Titacone.
Austin Paul Nelson.
April Leona Kreichmeyer, cum laude.
Michael Robert Rawls Minley.
Zachary James Odell, cum laude.
Victoria L. Bowden.
Annabelle Marie Abel.
Caleb Parker Brown.
Chase R. Miles, cum laude.
Jasser S. Fanous.
Dylan Campbell Shockey, summa cum laude.
Megan Renee Schleifer, cum laude.
Connor M. Pope, cum laude.
Cooper Lee Willick.
Kiona Celeste Breeden.
Gabriella Martin.
Madeline Grace Miller.
Cross Edward Elmquist.
Jacob Anthony Ochoa.
James C. Sherman, cum laude.
Cordell M. Finley.
Caleb Alexander Husted.
Trevor Lincoln Baker, magna cum laude.
Bryson Kloss Breitenbucher.
Josie Cecilio Orlando.
Josiah Cole McCrander.
Grace Margaret Otto, cum laude.
Jared Thomas Tedder.
Kaylee Nicole Compton, magna cum laude.
Michael Austin Frisbee, magna cum laude.
Quentin Kelly Costello.
Allison J. Clements.
Alec R. Coffrin, magna cum laude.
Janelle Ann Joswick, cum laude.
Hunter Gary Brennan, summa cum laude.
Lily Teagan Langans.
Nicholas W. Pinkston.
Rebecca L. Grimm, magna cum laude.
Zachary Francis Adamak.
Anna Carissa Peterson, summa cum laude.
Nolan Anthony Cowell, cum laude.
Merrick Lawrence Davis, summa cum laude.
Isaac Scott Hertweck.
Aniston Ellen Walker.
Trent Lewis Sexauer, cum laude.
Aika Sawai, cum laude.
Matthew R. Haynes.
Sarah Elizabeth Webb, cum laude.
Frick Borison.
Adriana Rayanne Smith.
Jessica Michelle Kerr.
Tanner Drake Edding.
Leora Bell Choate.
Justin M. Sear.
Jocelyn Jean Allen.
Audrey Rose Smith, magna cum laude.
Zachary Joseph Greenquist.
Whitney Lynn Rhodes.
Cole Eric Fleischman.
Jack E. Cook, summa cum laude.
Megan Nicole Hall.
Riley Elizabeth Breaker.
Jack William Haydank.
Jordan Burns, summa cum laude.
Ryan Joseph Haydank, magna cum laude.
Taylor Marie Pearson.
Braden Hoskins.
Kaylee Renee Santon Sadler.
Kylie Dale Fletcher.
Grayson Brooke Hollowell, cum laude.
Taylor Nicole Friedrich.
Chloe Ryan Clevorn, cum laude.
Mitchell Elliott Kellogg, cum laude.
Isaac Allen Tripp.
Christian Doneski.
Morgan A. Allen, cum laude.
Ian Alexander Kirkland.
Kalanqua Leroy Miller.
Savannah Grace Jenkins, cum laude.
Megan Sue Imhoff.
Hannah Marie Buchler.
Baylor Drake Long, cum laude.
Kennedy McCullough.
Chase Austin Dooley. Kimna.
Sydney Jane Warren, cum laude.
Clayton Ross Kimna.
Lindsay Alexandra Doherty.
Daniel Sawyer Cole Skinner.
Bridget Elizabeth Reckert, magna cum laude.
Marcus Joseph Narr.
Andrew J. Boney, magna cum laude.
Andrew Richard Kelch, cum laude.
Braden Joseph Hausman.
Reagan Renee Mance.
Elizabeth Grace Poe.
Tyler David Hunter.
Samuel Coulson Conger.
Savannah Marie Hetzler.
Nicole R. Adami.
Grace O'Keefe Murphy.
Caitlin Michelle Kirschner, cum laude.
Tara Elizabeth Buckner.
Sarah Nicole Casefair, cum laude.
Allison Noel Younger. Kiesling.
Nicholas L. Day.
Peyton Daniel Kiesling, magna cum laude.
Grace Sager.
Andrea M. Chambers.
Ladaya K. Jackson.
Abigail Madison Smith.
Tyler Scott Van Hoy.
Carsey Lynn McFarland, summa cum laude.
Bryce J. Potler, summa cum laude.
Brooke N. Gray, summa cum laude in the Honors College.
Nicholas William Powell.
Mariana Satovich.
Anthony Michael Franklin.
Jennifer Mango.
Thomas Joseph Dalton.
Cameron D. Stevens.
Carson William Trotter.
Luke Alexander Brink, summa cum laude.
Eric Christopher Cooley, magna cum laude.
Chloe Faye Celeste Lodestein.
Luke P. Valentine, magna cum laude.
Brandon John Wadlow.
Nicholas James Sloman.
Seth M. Boland.
Caleb William Volmert.
Cheyenne Joy Castle.
Samuel S. Tuma.
Slater Cole Eldridge.
Colin Stanley Walensky.
Melissa M. Jones.
Matthew J. Madlinger.
Benjamin Robert Lawrence, magna cum laude.
Brooke F. Clark.
Preston Michael Curlis, cum laude.
Ariel Eva Clark.
Hunter Dean Stillwell.
Anna Jacine Delat.
Jenna K. Shockley, summa cum laude.
Cameron Lynn Lombardo.
Cameron V. Fisher, cum laude.
Trenton Wade Bell.
Austin L. Barber, magna cum laude.
Joelle Lee Wentz.
Jacob Eli Poucher.
Sing Hong Lee.
Wyatt Wesley Craven.
Sing Yao Wong, summa cum laude.
Patrick Shane McCleary.
Uwan Lee, magna cum laude.
Yosef Samir Al-Hadrami.
Yiting Gao, cum laude.
Haider Ali Bhatti.
Han Yun Zhao.
Preston Michael Haynes Thompson.
Si Young Chao, cum laude.
Ben Thomas Bohanton.
Wen Tuan Tu.
Chloe Lee Eichel.
Drew J. Minnis.
Bella Shao Kilwin.
Allison Grace Morgans.
Kalia Sherrod, magna cum laude.
Kaylin Elaine Johnson, cum laude.
Kaylin Elizabeth Cumley.
Bailey Nicole Moreland.
Madison Nicole Smith, magna cum laude.
Hunter Kathleen May.
Emerson Catherine Graybill.
Jordan Elizabeth Burton.
Jaden Rose Perez, cum laude.
Miranda K. Allen, cum laude.
Caitlin Elizabeth Adams.
Maven Claire Weber, summa cum laude.
Jenny Jada King.
Isabella Paz Bercio Roca, cum laude.
Leah Brianna Brindler.
Brooke Jacqueline Williams.
Allison Page Hoff.
Allison Claire Groves, cum laude.
Leslie Ann Perez.
Ashton Hannah Morris, magna cum laude.
Ethan L. Howard, cum laude.
Alexis Page Curpius.
Jacob Boaz, cum laude.
Larissa Jo Schunsel.
Samuel Joseph Frisbee, cum laude.
Lauren Page Gilbreth.
Gabrielle Marie Bettler, summa cum laude.
Emma Joanne Gaithy, magna cum laude.
Madison Ray Stuber.
Jacqueline Danielle Greider.
Alyssa Shea Tate, cum laude.
Andy Jean Howard.
Mitchell Thomas Williams.
Sarah Elizabeth Fabris, summa cum laude.
Caleb David Pogue.
Jamie Charlize Parker.
Emma Kaylin Halstead.
Michaela B. Winslow, summa cum laude.
Joy Osley Reardon.
Halla C. Edquist, cum laude.
Taylor Marie Lowry.
McKenna Scott Seegers, cum laude.
Jarrett Thomas Payne.
Rachel Grace Grimes.
Elizabeth Loveline Colbert.
Catherine L. Zuzak.
Mason G. Bryan, cum laude.
Lindy Jane Mitchell.
George Joseph Weber.
Olivia Marie Bagby.
Landon Cade Wright.
Tristan Edward Lawson.
Michaela Joe Keith, cum laude.
Clayton M. Austin.
Kayla Danae Bennett.
Jonathan Rand Trout, cum laude.
Lorelei Nicole Wigginton, magna cum laude.
John M. Hennick.
Tabitha Lillian Tate.
Kira Dakota Teal Bunch.
Micah David Potabaum, cum laude.
Madison Elizabeth Benson.
Grant Logan McMillan.
Edwin James Tucker III, summa cum laude.
Austin Jean Page, cum laude.
Brenna Ray Novitsky.
Jordan Dion Hall.
Abigail Rianne Tavner.
Emily Renee Hance, magna cum laude.
Mercedes N. Mueller.
Tyler David Freeman.
Kendra Edge, cum laude.
Draven Charles Sharp.
Brooke A. Holtz.
Shepard Coleman Drake, magna cum laude.
Claire R. Green, magna cum laude.
Ni Tran Hu Nguyen, cum laude.
Mia Pilar Shelton.
Miao Feng Di.
Holly Ann Robson.
Jiang Yishan.
Damani Orion Warren.
Wang Jingshan.
Alyssa Danielle Van Loo.
Zhao Zihan.
Alejandro Tomas Pedron.
Liu Shi.
Paige Rochelle Bosseler.
Grace Ann Ford, summa cum laude.
Nicole Ann Lauman.
Li Jinhe.
Jessica Lynn Long.
Li Xin Yu.
Sydney Rain Louderback.
Guan Yu Cheng.
Brittany Page McGee.
Kong Jin Yu.
Brianna Lee Rotrammel.
Yao Cheng.
Brooke Jackie Anderson.
Deng Hong Yuan.
Hannah D. Sawyer.
Zhang Yufan.
Jessica Kathleen Shepard, cum laude.
Lin Xinying.
Sean McCloskey Evans.
Mario Jesus Gonzalez, summa cum laude.
Brooke Nicole Zekel.
Jahel Hezekiah Blue Smith.
Caitlin Marie Popes,
Khaled Al-Assad,
Emma Ruth Downey,
Austin J. Suddarth,
Carrie Leah Burgess,
Ryanel E. Frederick II,
Sadiq Ahmad Perkins,
Elizabeth A. Ferris, cum laude. Edsel Franklin McCaslin McMillan, Rhonda A. Black Fry,
As graduates, the university hopes you will continue your affiliation as proud and active alumni. To welcome you to the Alumni Association, I invite to the podium the Vice President for University Advancement, Brent Dunn.
Well, congratulations and welcome to the Missouri State University Alumni Association. We have over 150,000 alums that live in all 50 states and over 93 countries around the world. So please keep us up to date on where you are and what you're doing, because chances are pretty good wherever you land, there'll be alumni there that can help you both professionally and personally. After all, your relationship now with Missouri State is a lifelong experience. For almost 120 years, Missouri State has been educating people that are making a difference in the world. Now it's your turn. Now, as graduates, as you leave, we have a small gift for you, a Bearhead lapel pin. I realize it's not a car gift certificate, but it is a Bearhead lapel pin. But we ask that you wear it every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for the rest of your entire life. If not, just keep Missouri State close to your heart. Education changes people, and people change the world. Now, we want you to change the world and make a positive difference. But remember this, you're a student at Missouri State for just a short time in your life. You're an alum of Missouri State for the rest of your entire life. Now, congratulations. Now go get them and go Bears!
The Alma Mater is a distinctive song indicating your lifelong connection to our university. To conclude our ceremony, please stand for the Alma Mater, which will be sung by Matthew Julien.
Sing we praises now to our alma mater, all hail maroon and white. Missouri State we pledge devotion. May you live ever in truth and right. May you live ever in truth and right.
Thank you, Matthew. It's now time for the recessional, and that's an important part of this ceremony. So we're going to ask our guests to sit down just for a couple of minutes, and then students, graduates, to recess orderly. You will follow these directions. Graduates, you will be escorted from your seats and out of the arena by the floor marshals row by row. You can then reconnect with your families outside Great Southern Bank Arena. Again, congratulations to everyone. Good luck, and go Bears.